got nice socks on.
I do have nice socks on. That'll be Keith. Yep, I'll be Keith.
Oh, we got it. Tim. Yeah.
So Keith has been a lovely addition to the board. He's not as tall as I thought he was because you saw him just on remote for a long time.
I'm vertically challenged, John.
He's vertically challenged, it turns out, but otherwise a good guy. And he was actually with NYPA for some time previous to coming on with Brightcore, and he's been a terrific addition to our board, very knowledgeable about all things policy, very well connected. It's been a real upgrade in terms of that for us. So I want to let Keith introduce his panel and get things going.
Thank you, sir.
Keith Hayes.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I probably don't need an introduction since John has stolen that from me, amongst other things. So thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Hayes. I work for Brightcore Energy. That's my day job, and I am a board member at NY-GEO. So I want to start with a question, but it's not going to be for the panel. It's going to be for the audience. So if you would raise your hand if you work in finance or investment. Come on, you could do it. All right, keep your hands up. Now raise your hand if you work in technical, engineering, drilling, OEM, or construction. Oh yeah, look at that. All right, keep your hands up. So now raise your hand if you work in policy, government, academia, or nonprofit. Keep your hands up. Everybody. So look around. The point here is what we're trying to accomplish can only happen if these disciplines connect. So let's make that today's goal, and we'll start with this session. You can put your hands down. We're going to focus on financing the future of thermal energy, business models for scalable geothermal. So this panel will explore emerging financing strategies and ownership models shaping the next wave of geothermal deployment. Our panel experts will compare utility-owned and developer-owned approaches, examine opportunities for public-private partnerships, and discuss how to reduce ratepayer impacts while managing drilling and upfront capital risks. The conversation will highlight long-term O&M implications, equity considerations, and the structures best positioned to extend geothermal benefits to disadvantaged communities. So I have 4 distinct expert panelists here today who will cover the disciplines that I just mentioned. First, I have Tim Weber, Andrew Hauser, Adam Barsky, and Sara Ross. So we're going to go a little bit off script here. I'm not going to give you their bios. They will give you their bios with their responses to the questions. So the first area that we're going to explore is financing and ratepayer impacts. Here I'll start with Adam. So, oh yeah. Would help if they had microphones, right?
Thank you, Keith. Good morning. I'm Adam Barsky. I'm the EVP CFO for the New York Power Authority, otherwise known as NYPA. By show of hands, how many people in the room know who NYPA is and what we do? Okay, pretty good. Well, just to remind you, we are the largest state-owned public utility in the country. We have 17 generating facilities. We generate somewhere between 20-25% of the state's electricity through our 17 generating facilities. Obviously, the biggest ones are our hydroelectric plants in Niagara and St. Lawrence. And we also develop renewable projects now and looking at other technologies. We also work with both economic development customers as well as large governmental customers like New York City Housing Authority, the Port Authority, the MTA, County of Westchester, small municipalities throughout the whole state. So we are able to provide a myriad of services for all of these entities. And people find it very easy to work through NYPA. It's very easy for these entities to contract with us. And it's also easy for people to work through our own networks where we can help match contractors, vendors with the needs of our customers. So we have lots of programs on energy efficiency and others that we offer to all of our customers. But getting back to the question at hand is, what can we do to save ratepayers money? A number of things. First of all, we're very excited about geothermal. The best thing about geothermal today is that it's not offshore wind. Right? And so what do I really mean by that? I mean, as obviously you know that the current administration has been violently hostile to offshore wind, and to a lesser degree, but same impact to solar. So come July of this year, those technologies who had tax credits, very generous tax credits, those are expiring. The good news for geothermal is that their tax credits are not. And that's what I really mean, is that they extend until 2033, and they can be very generous. It can be up to, in some cases, 50%. So it's generally a base 30%, and then there is if you are a for-profit entity, there's a 10% domestic content adder if you show that you have majority of your project using domestic contents. And then there's also rules around not using what they call FIOC, which is foreign-owned countries of concern products, meaning China. There's also a energy community adder of 10%. So if you're doing your project in a certain community that's identified as having characteristics that meet the standards, usually around employment and unemployment rates and other metrics like that, you can get an additional 10% for that. So get up to 50% credit. Now, those credits work differently whether you're a not-for-profit or a for-profit. The big thing that happened in the IRA a few years ago was that for many years, these credits have been around. They weren't available for not-for-profit or governmental entities because those entities don't pay taxes. And that was a big concern, and there was a big coalition with, entities like NYPA and our large public power council we belong with the unions and advocates for clean energy, made a big push in the IRA to get what they call direct pay. And what that means is it's basically a refundable tax credit. And it's actually better in some ways because you actually get a check from the federal government, cash check. If you're trying to get tax credits on the other projects, you're usually having to monetize that through the tax equity market, and it's not always as efficient, and it has complications. So that's really some of those big issues there. And so when we talk about ratepayer impact, post July 26th, geothermal is going to be very competitive with other technologies, and there will be a lot more activity in that area for sure. And there are lots of, we'll talk further about it. I don't want to take up the time and wait for another question, but a lot of interesting financing ways that we can help customers, whether they be for-profit, not-for-profit, achieve savings and access tax credits and get alternative forms of financing that are very favorable in order to employ this technology. So we're very excited about it. And the last thing I'll say before moving on and passing it on is that at NYPA, we are actually leading by example. So currently with our 300,000 square foot building we have under construction in White Plains, we are going to have a full geothermal system, courtesy of Keith and his company at Brightcore. And we had to drill 140 different holes in the ground before we put in all the pieces to make it work. But this is going to be, not only we have geothermal, we're going to have solar glass, we're going to have solar, rooftop solar, so it's going to be as clean and efficient as a building could possibly be, and it really will be there as a showcase for anybody to come look at and show prospective clients, customers, what have you, about what can be done with geothermal. So we're hoping that this will help also jumpstart people in trying to adopt this technology. So again, we're putting our money and where our mouth is, and we are leading by example. But I'll pass it back to Keith. Thank you.
Thank you, fantastic. So My next question is for Sara, obviously your bio. How does funding, financing, budgeting impact K through 12, and what level of coordination and collaboration or barriers have to be overcome for school districts to drive ground source heat pump technology as a greater adoption?
Great, thanks, Keith. Nice to see you all. I'm Sara Ross with Undaunted K-12. Most of you have probably not heard of us. We're a small, scrappy little nonprofit that spends almost all of our time thinking about how we can help schools decarbonize, become more resilient to climate change, and how we prepare young people to thrive and be prepared to join this great workforce and other jobs in the green economy. So I want to talk a little bit, since we're raising hands here this morning, I could ask you all, raise hands if you've been to a K-12 school or you have a kid in school, because we've all been there, right? These buildings are the heart of our community. So when we think about really scaling this technology, I think and hope that many of you will agree with me that K-12 schools are a great place to start, and I'm so glad that we're going to have some young people here this afternoon that are getting introduced to this industry, because I think it's an awesome opportunity. So when we think about scaling up in K-12, I think the gold standard and the story that I want to tell you all is around what we've done in Massachusetts. So, Adam's right, this tax credit for geothermal has been an absolute game changer. As a recovering solar person, I saw what the tax credit did to drive deployment in solar. And so when the IRA passed in 2022 and learned about this direct pay piece, I was like, wow, this is gonna be a big deal for this industry and a huge opportunity for schools that, have sad old HVAC systems, desperately need cooling, are much more in tune to the importance of indoor air quality coming out of COVID. This technology, and now dealing with volatility in energy markets, this technology is just such a good fit for schools. So how do we get this in more schools across the country? So when the IRA passed, we went to, I come from Massachusetts, we have a school building authority. That is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. If you do K-12 market stuff in Massachusetts, the whole world revolves around our school building authority. They are responsible for 66 cents on the dollar of every new school we construct. And they are part of, and they also fund HVAC replacement projects. So they are an important player. And so we went to them and said, hey, did you know there's this new tax credit for geothermal? And it can help you stretch your capital dollars farther. They had no clue about this, so we first taught them about this tax credit opportunity, and they then convened, the whole construction industry that touches K-12 buildings to come here, a little old webinar around these tax credits and this technology. So they really helped us convene and get the whole A&E community to the table to hear, both about this technology, why it was a great fit for schools, and around this tax credit and how it was changing the relative economics of, say, a gas boiler versus, a geothermal system. Fast forward a few years, we put some more pressure on them, and they removed a program they had to fund new gas boilers. And instead, now they have a heat pump retrofit program where they're putting $150 million every 2 years into retrofitting heat pumps into existing schools in Massachusetts. And we're trying to make sure as many of those projects as possible are geothermal projects taking advantage of this tax credit. So where we stand today, a few years into this now, is the vast majority, probably like 95% of new schools that are being built in Massachusetts are all going geo. Yeah, woohoo!
Yay. Great example.
And in speaking with one of those municipal leaders the other day about how their project came to be, she said, honestly, Sara, when we started this project, we just got the vibe that we had to start from a point of we're doing geo and make an argument why we weren't going to do it. We kind of felt like we had to do it, and that was not through any fancy policy. That was not. It was really the soft power of the state agency leaning in, even when people got a little squirmy. There were some mayors who weren't sure about it, and they'd say, no, go talk to Undaunted, go talk to Sara, come back to us with your final answer, which better be geothermal. So we've really moved the market substantially in Massachusetts in K-12, and we think that's gonna have bleed over effects into other parts of the heavy construction industry, so outside of K-12, certainly across the public sector, and we hope, across into other parts of the segment. So the pieces there really, a lot of awareness building. we celebrate and lift up the examples of schools that are doing geothermal and getting big checks, those paper checks that come from the IRS. Those are great kind of visual artifacts that catch people's attention. And we're excited to see in what other markets we can replicate that kind of story where we move from, a state agency that's kind of agnostic and a market that's kind of sort of finding its way to a market that is being driven in this direction through the direct, kind of influence of state agencies. So we're excited to try and replicate that in other states, and we'll really count on all of you to be there, with the workforce, with the technology, with those domestic content bonus adders that we can get to make this a reality in other markets. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sara. So we'll move to Andrew. Again, your bio. And the question is, New York City is the quintessential opportunity zone for exploring financial models such as CPACE. Can you speak to how that works at NYCEEC?
Yeah, well, great to be here. Andrew Hauser, I'm with NYSEEC, NYCEEC, or New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. The quick background on what we are and what we do: we are an independent 501c3 mission-driven lender. We fall under the Green Bank umbrella, which now is a term that I would imagine some or most of you are familiar with. We've been around for coming on 15 years now. Our mission and our reach has expanded over those 15 years, but broadly the core of that mission has stayed the same. The goal is to bring financing, debt products to serve these kinds of projects and serve communities that we lend in. So we offer financing products ranging from small, tailored niche bridge loans to traditional construction and term loans. And Keith, you mentioned CPACE. CPACE is a product that we offer. We also serve a dual role associated with CPACE. We are the CPACE administrator for New York City. So NYSEEC serves as the formal CPACE administrator, working with the City of New York to administer the program. And then we also are a qualified lender in New York City for CPACE as well. CPACE, commercial property assessed clean energy. Loans are a financial mechanism whereby you can finance energy efficiency or clean energy upgrades to buildings, new construction or retrofit. Now, it's been around for a while. New York City is a tough market to build in and transact for many reasons, good and bad, but the program or the mechanism and financial tool has been around for a while in other markets across the country and is really gaining traction in New York City now, which is great to see. It's just another tool whereby hopefully some of these projects, geothermal included, but projects across the energy efficiency spectrum can continue to be financed, and it's another way for property owners to access capital. So I'm happy to talk about the actual mechanics of that product. It's a unique tool whereby the debt is essentially connected to the building. It's paid through a special assessment on the property's tax bill. So it's a unique financial tool. It allows lenders to get comfortable with different leverage points. And obviously there are a host of requirements associated with it. There's a savings to investment ratio, which is a key aspect of CPACE, which essentially limits how many dollars you can spend, right? The purpose of the tool, again, is to finance clean energy and energy efficiency upgrades. So it tries to tie those dollars to the actual upgrades themselves. Along with CPACE, NYSEEC, along with other green banks, New York Green Bank included, which is the New York State Green Bank, offers, like I mentioned, various other debt products, both for on-balance sheet or off-balance sheet financing, whether we're making a direct loan to a building owner, property owner, or we're trying to finance a geothermal project in a more traditional project finance structure where it'd be off-balance sheet and centered around an as-a-service model. So we're obviously here to talk about getting these projects financed, and green banks are just another avenue whereby project developers and owner-operators can go and seek financing.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Great tools, and I know they've been impactful. I'm going to move to Tim. same for you, Tim. Diverso has three models. Zero-cost utility model, design, build, and contribution utility model. Can you briefly run through these models? Hopefully I got them right.
Yeah, you got that off our website, didn't you?
Yes.
Need to update that. That's okay. So, good morning, everyone. Tim Weber, co-founder, CEO of Diverso Energy. So, been in the industry about 20 years, 22 years, I guess. 2014 started Diverso. The idea behind Diverso was, at that time, I was trying to sell geothermal both in Canada and the US to multi-residential buildings, commercial buildings, and the pushback I got every time was it didn't matter what the payback was. We saw projects with 3, 4, 5-year paybacks, 15% IRRs. The economics were great. The comment was, it's too risky and I don't want to pay for it. Don't have room for it. You know, our capital stack, you know, we can't insert debt. We, you know, no more money can go into the waterfall. And this is primarily new construction, to be clear. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. Then I'll just start a business that's essentially like a gas utility where we'll remove the cost, remove the risk, make sure it's off balance sheet, give the developers exactly what they're asking for. So we did, started Diverso, and found out that there was a little bit more to that reason why they weren't doing geothermal. We thought we had this, you know, magic pill, this Tylenol to solve a headache, and as it turns out, there really was no headache at all. And this is in the backdrop of 2015, the housing market in Toronto was on a boom. You know, there was 150 cranes up, tower cranes at any time in Toronto. Condos were selling out in a weekend, 30, 40% margins. Apartment buildings were leasing up in a weekend. Guaranteed, doesn't matter what piece of crap they built, it was going to trade at a 4 cap. You know, REITs were lining up to buy these buildings. So the problem with that is there's really no motivation to do anything different. Real estate had become an assembly line, and we were introducing, you know, putting a wrench in that cog, something different. And that's something that's very hard to solve for in a business model. You know, we were trying to give away geothermal for free, and it was basically don't let the door hit you on the way out every single time. Fortunately, a few early adopters got a little bit of momentum with that model. And the utility model, which is our core business, the whole key there was to make sure that it's not considered debt. And I bring that up to the difference between new construction and retrofitting. Retrofitting is different. I don't think it really matters. But with new construction, at least, you know, I'll preface this with in the Toronto market, I'm an outsider here. I can't speak to the New York market, but in Toronto, it's very difficult to add more debt to a project. So we had to make sure that our contract was structured in a way where it's truly off balance sheet. It was in Canada Revenue saw it as an operating lease, not a capital lease. And then what started to change was policy. And I talk about this a lot. You know, incentives are great, but in Toronto developers where they're essentially, you know, allergic to, you know, departure from the norm and addicted to status quo, in order to move the needle, they had to kind of switch from carrot to stick. And that stick was in the form of Toronto Green Standards, where now it forced them to think outside the box. Here's an energy, if you want to build, here's the energy and carbon target. Nowhere in the Green Standard had mentioned geothermal, and that's what I loved about that policy. It just provided a very aggressive target. How they got there was up to them. So it kind of came more of a free market approach. What's the best, you know, solution? What's the path of least resistance to get to that very aggressive target? And that's where geothermal, the right technology coupled with the right business model, ended up being the winner. And you know, that's what breeds innovation in my mind in a competitive market where, because at the end of the day, the developers didn't have to do geothermal, but they had to hit a certain target. So we were up against air source heat pumps or better envelopes, triple pane punched windows. There's different ways of getting there, and we wanted to make sure that our solution was the easiest and had no impact on their budget, no impact on the selling price of the condo structure in a way, so there's no impact on condo fees or rent or utilities. And so that's basically our utility model. Design build is just exactly what it sounds like. It's for clients that don't want us to own it, which I'll get into that a little bit later. I think that's maybe a follow-up question. But clients that want to own it themselves, we do kind of a turnkey. We design it, we build it. We have our own drill rigs, which was not by design. We always swore there's no way we're going to own our own drilling company, and here we are with 13 drill rigs, but that was more out of necessity. And I think as the industry evolves and the drilling industry kind of matures and grows, you can separate. You can be a geothermal utility without owning your own fleet of drill rigs. We just, because of access to resources, we had to do that. So.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to stick with you. We're going to shift to system ownership, but my follow-up to you is: should geothermal loops be owned by developers, utilities, or the building owners? It's a loaded question.
Yeah, I'll split the room on this one, I'm sure. So I heard a term from John Chivacco about 10 years ago, and I love it, and
Say it isn't so.
Yeah. And the longer I'm in this industry, the more that this actually applies to me. And I remember him saying, I wish I was unencumbered by knowledge. And it's great, because in some cases being naive is really helpful, because you can just do whatever is sort of the idealistic approach. And we've got about 35 systems that we're managing right now. And I should also preface, our core business is multi-family residential. So these are buildings that range from 200 to 800 units, 10 stories to 65 stories, downtown Toronto, kind of high-density urban. That's where we focus, where we specialize. And owning these systems, we're realizing more and more, is a huge pain. It's hard. And a lot of it, I hear, well, if it's designed right or installed right, yeah, that's just the minimum. That's the starting point. But you can have a perfectly designed system that, if you leave it unchecked and let it go, it'll catastrophically fail within about 6 years. Because even in Toronto, our buildings are not balanced, they're heating dominant. So if you think of a bore field underneath a building with 15-foot spacing, it's not your typical geothermal, it's a heat sink. We're storing energy, that's really what it is. So in the summer, all that heat's going into the ground, well, it has to come out again. If you think of it like a bank account where you want the balance to be zero every January, if you're depositing more than you're withdrawing, when it's dollars, that's a good thing. When it's BTUs, it's not. And that bore field will get hot. So that has to be managed. And the problem with the bore field, it doesn't impact the building comfort for a long time. And building operators are kind of more hardwired to, if it's not broken or if nobody's complaining, it's fine, right? And I equate it to kind of like, you can go without changing the oil in your car for 3 years and say, oh, I don't have to change the oil in my car. It starts fine, gets me to work every day. I don't notice a difference, and then one day it doesn't. So, and that's kind of bore fields. And we're seeing now a lot of these systems failing. The schools in Ontario about 20 years ago, there's a huge grant went out, they tendered it like schools do. I'd say 90% of those systems have been decommissioned, and they've put gas back in. And if you mention geothermal to any of the schools in Ontario, and it's immediately a 4-letter word, not happening, because of that experience. It wasn't a technology issue, it was a procurement and ownership and management issue. And I don't even think it was a design issue in most cases. So my feeling is, it's not about whether the building owner owns it or us as a private utility or a publicly regulated utility. It really comes down to accountability. So I like the idea of skin in the game. It's not a consultant, best efforts. This is somebody who's got $3 million invested. There's a contractual obligation, and our contract is very clear on operating parameters and BTUs. We're outside of that. We don't get paid. We're in default. There's also financial motivation. You want to recover that investment. Obviously, nobody wants to just have a sunk cost in a building and not recover it. So that's more on the practical, technical side of things. What we're seeing right now in Toronto in the rental market, we used to be all condos. That was a really simple business model, very transactional. Build a building, sell it, exit stage left. They don't want to pay for anything. Rental's very different. They stick around. So we had to rejig our business model where, how do we get our charge as low as possible, that monthly fee, to make sure that our developers can flow it through to tenants in the form of sub-metering. It doesn't hit their books, but doesn't create a choking point for tenants. So that's where we, kind of the contribution model you mentioned, where they pay for it during construction. It's a design build. We acquire the asset before it gets put into service. We can still get the tax credit. The benefit of that is we're not carrying it during construction. Time value money is extremely valuable. And we were able to reduce our hurdle rate because we're not taking on that construction risk. So it ended up reducing our charge by about 40%. So we're down to about $45, $50 a month per apartment building, which is great, because that's pretty close to what they would have spent on regular utilities anyway. The developer gets a low-carbon, future-proof building, which is really important right now, because most of these condo developers have switched to rental. They want to sell these buildings to some type of institutional REIT. Most of the institutional REITs still want low-carbon buildings. That's a priority. They're worried about things like local law 97 happening in Ontario, where all of a sudden their gas building is worth less because there's a carbon tax or something else. So it really checks off all the boxes, but also making sure that somebody's accountable for the operation of that system, because I can't stress that enough. These multi-residential systems will fail without guaranteed, and it's just a lot of active management required. So I don't think it matters who the ownership is, but whoever owns it needs to recognize what they're signing up for.
Sounds like we need you up in Toronto, Sara. Yeah. So a follow to you, Adam. How do state and public agencies view ownership, especially in these campus settings? They're large loads, and they definitely have an impact and direct benefits to the grid for flexibility and resiliency. And I know your strategic plan, sort of points to that as one of the tenets. Are there barriers that would prevent public-private ownership where a public entity system is owned by a private entity?
So it's a great question, Keith, and I think that's one of the challenges we're trying to solve for. And it gets to the questions or some of the comments that were made earlier about ownership or on balance sheet, off balance sheet, and I'll go through some of those things. So preferably today for public entities, and I think a lot of entities, to the extent they can avoid having to take on debt or have this treated as capital for their purposes becomes problematic for a variety of reasons. The more debt you take on, it has a variety of implications for any entity, but particularly in the government sector, because there are fixed resources available for capital projects and a very difficult process to go through approvals and get appropriations, whether at the local level, state level, what have you. So a few years ago, a lot of things were being done through this, I would call it sort of arbitrage between what's a capital lease, what's an operating lease, and using the operating lease to get some advantages. That all changed a few years ago here in the US because the accounting rules changed where the accountant said, wait a second, people are gaming this rule. Half of the people, if it's advantageous, they call something a capital lease, and if it's advantageous this way, they're calling it an operating lease. And there's no way for people to look at different companies and their balance sheets because it becomes sort of apples and oranges. So they said, we're getting rid of all that. So in today's marketplace, any lease is considered a capital lease. So there's no such thing as an operating lease today in the United States. So then, okay, so what do we do next? What the rules also say is that if you enter into a power purchase agreement, it is not considered capital, and it's not considered a capital lease so long as that power purchase agreement doesn't have within it an embedded lease. So what does that mean? To simplify it, it's really the difference between a take and pay power purchase agreement versus a take or pay power purchase agreement. To the extent that you're paying no matter what, it's considered a lease. If you're paying only so long as the asset is producing and you're buying the energy from it, it's considered to be a power purchase agreement and not subject to the lease rules, the capital rules, what have you. And even in New York State, we're doing a lot of things. I see our friends from SUNY here, Carter Strickland, we're working very closely with him, a lot of other state agencies around how to allow them to take on projects without it causing problems within their capital budgets, because there's such a challenge for resources and priorities. So if there's a way to do these things through these alternative means of financing, that's going to be considered more desirable. So this whole concept right now that is being done and evolving is really energy as a service. So it's really broadening from just buying electricity from a plant or a renewable project like a solar in terms of a traditional PPA, but now it's starting to spread to things like geothermal, where you can do geothermal as an energy as a service and have that reduced to a PPA. The other advantage of having a PPA, particularly from the NYPA standpoint, and you can only really do this through NYPA because we are considered a public utility, meaning a non-for-profit governmental utility. There is another, I'll call it a section in the IRS code. It's been in place for a number of years. It was usually used for gas, and it's called the ability to do prepaid contracts. And the way prepaid contracts work is that you can finance 20 years of a project and do that and essentially pay for it all up front using tax-exempt financing, which has nothing to do with the financing around the energy as a service, but what it allows you to do, I'll give an example. We just did this last year. We did $1 billion bond issue for New York City. It actually won Deal of the Year with the bond buyer. We did over 50 back-to-back PPAs with DCAS, the New York City General Services Agency, and when NYPA would enter into a PPA with the provider and have a back-to-back PPA with a DCAS, and then we would put what they call novate these PPAs into this prepaid structure, and the result of all of it, it's a very complicated structure, but the people who know how to do it have made it cookie cutter, so it is a repeat and rinse type of process, but the end result is you get a 10% reduction on your PPA price after you've gone through this. So that's just another adder. When you add on the tax credits and everything else, now here you get additional 10% reduction by doing it through prepaid transactions. So these are the kind of things that are being done here to try to make financing of these projects a lot more efficient. But you'll find that with a lot of these local governments or anybody, they're going to be looking for ways to not have ownership, and it depends too. So if you have if they own it and you're trying to get financing for that, it'll present problems with your lender because the lender is going to want to have a lien on those assets, and these entities will not, are usually prohibited from allowing a third party to have that kind of a lien on their assets because they've already been pledged elsewhere. So the ownership issue in question is very important here. But again, I think things like geothermal lend itself more to this model because you can have this distinct ownership and have it more clear and not present those problems. And the other advantage of geothermal is that unlike LED or other types of energy efficiency type of projects, these also lend themselves to longer-term financing because these assets will last a very long time. Again, stretching out how long the payments can be made for, lowering the costs on an annual basis. So tremendous advancements being made in how to get some of these projects done. I know there's a lot of engineers in the room here, but this is what we call financial engineering. And I think that's a whole other discipline that is going to be required to make these projects competitive. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, very promising. So I'm going to shift to you, Sara. Do you find that the state education department or districts want to own the systems, or do they prefer third-party ownership under the current administration? And also, do you think school districts will be interested in this, meaning that someone else is actually controlling the asset?
Yeah, I mean, we start from a place, right, where everything with schools is hyper-local, right? States aren't really involved, feds are not involved, the decisions around our school buildings are your neighbors who are on the school board, the superintendent. This is hyper-local decision-making. So those are the people who are going to make that choice around are we owning this asset that keeps our kids warm in the winter and cool and comfortable in the shoulder seasons? Or are we, trusting some other body to do that, right? Because you know that when it's 60 degrees in the classroom and parents are unhappy, those folks are going to get those calls and are going to have to answer, wait, you turn that responsibility over to who? To whom? My grammar isn't so great. So I think that's what you really you have to place yourself in that person who's going to get that call when the school is uncomfortable and unsafe for kids, right? And they have to have a really good answer for why things aren't working the way they will. I mean, Tim's story though makes me kind of shudder around what's been going on in Toronto. And as talking about naive, right? I've been in this industry talking about these systems for 4 years now. I would consider myself really still a newbie. And so I'm very worried about, the long-term performance of these systems in schools. And schools don't have a great track record, frankly, of upkeeping their HVAC systems. There are a lot of crummy HVAC systems out there in schools. This is one of the things we do run into also, where, a system gone wrong and it's become a 4-letter word too. So I think it's something we need to contend with. Some school districts in really rough financial situations, I'm thinking about Prince George's County in Maryland, have started to dabble with some non-traditional delivery methods for just school buildings overall, where they're doing public-private partnerships, and so I think those will always be on the margin. What I'm intrigued by is, I think the one player that school districts could potentially kind of trust a significant role to delivering heating and cooling to their schools too would be their utility, right? So we all know about the Framingham project. There is a administrative building for Framingham Public Schools on that loop. So they have, they trust their utility to deliver heating and cooling to that building. I think schools, on utility-owned loops, I could see that kind of passing muster when the people call and say, why is my kid cold? Talk to the utility, right? That's kind of a thing I can imagine them finding themselves getting comfortable with. But I think it's going to be a tough sell to do kind of non-traditional ownership directly with a private sector player in the school space.
Thank you. So we're going to shift. Our last focus is going to be on disadvantaged communities, which is probably the most important here. And Andrew, I want to start with you. New York City has a disproportionate share of disadvantaged communities. So what I'd like to know is how NYCEEC is focusing on financing models that allow for greater adoption in those communities.
Yeah, it's a tough question. So the kind of our track record with trying to focus on LMI communities, projects in DACs, disadvantaged communities, is strong. So it's been a very, very poignant focus for us. As I mentioned at the top, we're a mission-driven organization. Our number one goal is to finance projects that advance energy efficiency, clean energy in communities, but we're very much working in communities in the lending territories that we're active. So another very strong focus for us is on social impact. So over the life of NYSEG, coming up on 15 years now, roughly 80% or so of our projects have been focused in a DAC, have been with an LMI building or in a LMI area. So it is very much a strong focus area for us. I mentioned it's a tough question because the reality is projects that we're talking about a rent-regulated multifamily building, they're just tighter margins. It's tighter all around. So trying to do upgrades, improvements, especially where it might not be on par with another option is extremely difficult. What we do is we make it a priority area and kind of build up a track record with these borrowers and sponsors, help understand where the pain points are, help understand where we can try and structure around some of just frankly the tight cash flows in these projects, and be flexible. Granted, we have the luxury of being flexible because we are a mission-driven lender, so it is something that we are actively trying to do, is to promote these projects and figure out where we can structure around difficulties in project economics. It's not easy to do, but the reality is there are organizations out there that are very much focused on trying to bring these projects to disadvantaged communities, LMI buildings, et cetera.
Thanks, Andrew. So Tim, I'm going to shift to you. I don't know if Toronto has the affordability crisis, but from your perspective, what do you think needs to happen to solve this problem?
Oh boy. Well, so on that, Toronto right now, and again, I'm level set, I'm the outsider. This is my perspective as a Canadian Toronto-based, but affordability in Toronto is a major problem right now. And it's not about disenfranchised communities, it's everybody. If you currently don't own a home in Toronto, most people, unless they make over $200,000 a year, if they don't own a home, they consider themselves locked out of the housing market. And I work with young engineers, 26, 27 years old, that have 4 roommates, and these are young professionals. So it's impacting everybody. A starter home in Toronto, 2-bedroom starter home will be $900,000. So it's really tough. 1-bedroom apartment, $3,000 a month. So, when you're looking at that through the perspective of geothermal, this is a real estate problem, not an energy problem. However, it all adds up. And I think, and I have these conversations once in a while, and this is maybe me as a business owner, my perspective is a little bit different. I think in order to solve an affordability problem, you have to start with how do you do that in a way that's profitable? Because if you want something to be financially sustainable, it has to be financially profitable. You can see one-off demonstration projects where you've solved an affordability issue on that particular building, but how do you, scale that up? And part of the issues we have in Toronto is 30% of the cost of a building are government-related costs. So taxes, levies, development charges, it's crazy, 30%. So that's one thing that needs to change. I think when we look at natural gas and where it could potentially go, there is a breaking point. And if natural gas were to double, I think that combined with a lot of these homeowners right now bought their $2 million home 5 years ago, interest rates were 1%. We only have 5-year terms on our mortgages. So imagine you are paying a mortgage payment on a $2 million home with 1%, and it's about to switch to 5%, right? So there's a lot of people that are kind of looking at their economics going, I may very well lose my home. And there'll be a lot of foreclosures, I think, in the next 18 months, which is really sad. So our affordability issue goes far beyond energy. However, that being said, we're focused, our clients now, I mentioned earlier, we're in a boom market. We're not in a bust market, but we're in a very competitive market, which is actually a good thing because I'm seeing a lot of our clients, real estate developers now, are being forced to be efficient. A lot of their transgressions were covered up with high margins before, and now they have to build far more efficiently. There's no, that room for error is very tight. So their processes were tightened up, their margins are lower, they've reduced their cost of construction, so that's helping. But even in our world, we have competitors now, so for technologies like geothermal, in a competitive market, we have to make sure, how do we install our system as cost effectively and efficiently as possible? How do we get creative with our financial model, so our monthly fee, because our clients, they have a limit. They're like, well, we'll do a utility model, but it can't be more than X. Maybe it's $45 a month. Well, how do we structure this to come in below $45 a month? Because in a competitive environment, the geothermal can impact the rent, and it can't be a utility cost that's uncompetitive with conventional, or they're worried about leasing up their building. So I think a lot of that comes down to innovation, competitiveness, and kind of, because of that affordability crisis that's forcing the hand, government stepping in with, 50-year amortization loans, and that's helping us because these, preferred financing models that are available to developers comes with a hook, and that hook is sustainability, energy reduction. So that's just one more thing helping geothermal. But yeah, I wish I had a magic wand to wave to solve that problem.
No vacation home for me in Toronto, unfortunately. Thanks.
Or any home, period.
Exactly. So, Sara, I'm going to shift back to you. How can these financing models ensure that disadvantaged communities, and certainly K through 12 in those communities, will derive the benefits of geothermal?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. Again, going back to young people's education, their health and well-being is at stake when these buildings and these HVAC systems can't protect them in this climate. I think it's a really important question. And the tough reality is that GEO deployment in K-12 stands on an existing terrain of how we finance school buildings, which is massively inequitable. In most states, it is completely on the back of local taxpayers. So poor communities don't have big tax bases and they don't have the money for nice fancy schools, and wealthy communities have deeper tax bases and can afford fancier schools. That is the terrain that all of this sits on, and even with a tax credit for GEO, we haven't changed that fundamental structure for how we fund our school infrastructure. It is just massively inequitable. So how to change that? States really need to play a strong role here and can. Again, going back to Massachusetts, where we have this state agency that funds new school construction, to the extent they can start to spread the peanut butter a little more evenly and make sure those low-income communities are getting a big, kind of cost share from the state, and then help them do GEO, that is a recipe to bring this into more low-income communities. I think the other piece we've seen be successful is performance contracting, where they're bringing, kind of know-how about how to put a whole suite of energy efficiency measures together, with GEO as part of that, and how to put together that financial model, how to help those school districts who don't have a lot of capacity to investigate these new technologies, investigate these new incentives, how to, just bring their capacity up so that they can get these projects done. I think the other piece that has been interesting is actually this tax credit has helped get local voters on board with funding school construction projects. There was a brilliant superintendent that I talked to up in Michigan. Local voters had, refused to pass bond issuances to replace their HVAC system in their school, and 2 times, and desperate. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to threaten to close the school and send the kids to another school district down the road. And none of the parents, of course, wanted that. And then he used the fact that there was this tax credit for GEO available today to get voters on board with approving a fund to replace the HVAC system and install GEO. He said, look, we're going to need cooling. This is going to come home to roost at some point. If you give me money today and we move now, we could get 40% back from the feds for doing this thing we know we need to do. So that helped motivate local local voters to really step up. And then the last thing I think about, where we can start to get creative is, how can low-income communities kind of draft off of utility exploration in this area, right? PGW in Philadelphia is exploring, doing a study of geothermal for a school. How can they help get schools, part of the way towards this move? I'm curious about, some of our higher ed partners that are doing great work. I think about Brown, I think about Yale doing massive GEO systems. How can they help kind of bring those local school districts along to provide some TA, provide some kind of sharing and know-how? But it is certainly a difficult problem to solve. But states are really, where it's at in terms of helping get us there.
Great, thank you. So, Adam, we'll wrap up with you. How is NYPA ensuring that disadvantaged communities are seeing the benefits of these clean energy systems? Again, I know that your G plan, carves that out. So.
Yeah, that's a very important aspect of our projects and what we're trying to do. Some of this was made possible and carved into legislation that enabled us to take on and actually own and build these renewable projects. So a couple of examples. One is, and again, some of it has not yet spread to geothermal, but I think the model is there to be replicated. So for example, JFK Airport, we have put in a very large solar installation, and it was at the time the largest in the city, probably still is. But part of that project was also community solar, where it was providing benefits to the residents within the area of the airport, and those residents were considered that community. So there are things like that. The other is that when we adopted our renewable strategy plan and part of the legislation, we created something called the REACH program. And what that does is in various projects, again, it does, and without hurting financing, without hurting returns, but it does create additional revenues from the projects that will go through a DPS order through IOUs and provide low, moderate income residents with bill credits for these projects. And this is a model I think will become expanding, and developers actually have the ability to do it on a voluntary basis. And why would they want to do this on a voluntary basis? Because many of these projects, especially the utility scale ones, the larger ones that have to get approvals from Department of Public Service and others, there's always a community benefit component that a lot of these companies are required to make. And that creates almost a separate job for them, where they have to go out and find NGOs and other ways in which to make these contributions. And it's not very efficient. It raises all kinds of issues around potential for fraud and corruption and other things about how is that money actually making its way to a benefit of any individual or community. So when this program started, a lot of people perked up and said, if I can just write a check and meet my community benefits obligation and send it through this portal, and that'll go to benefit low and moderate income individuals through bill credits, I'd much rather do that than trying to figure out how to spread this money around through community benefit organizations where we really don't know where that money's going. And it creates a lot of work, and it creates a lot of risk and a lot of issues that people are finding this model could help avoid. So we think that's very promising in the future, and will provide significant benefits for those residents.
Fantastic. So we are at a time, and I just want to thank Sara, Adam, Andrew, and Tim for your insights, for your expertise, and for moving us towards our common objectives here. So could we have a round of applause for our amazing panel?
Well done. I feel a little bit smarter and feels challenging. Lots of work to do, but some good solutions in big areas. So that was lovely. Thanks for putting that together, Keith. So we're on a break now, and we will resume. The walls will come tumbling down here, and then we will be back here at 10:30. So about 20 minutes from now. Do what you got.